Tonight on Dreadful Visions, we're exploring the strange things people experience while the rest of the world is asleep. Most night shift workers will tell you that empty buildings have their own sounds and routines, but sometimes those routines begin long after everyone else has gone home. Story 1. The Last Elevator. 34-year-old Marcus Hill had worked as a janitor for almost 12 years. He'd cleaned schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, and office towers all across Illinois. Night shifts never bothered him. In fact, he preferred them. No crowds, no interruptions, and no people constantly walking over the floors he'd just finished cleaning. In February of 2026, Marcus accepted a new job at the Hawthorne Financial Center in downtown Chicago. The building stood 20 stories high and overlooked the Chicago River. During the day, nearly 2,000 employees filled the offices. Lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors worked from sunrise until early evening. By 9 o'clock each night, however, the tower became almost completely empty. Almost. Marcus shared the building with one security guard stationed in the lobby and another janitor responsible for the lower floors. Marcus always worked the upper half of the building alone. His routine never changed. He'd start on the 20th floor and slowly work his way down, emptying trash cans, vacuuming carpets, wiping glass doors, and locking conference rooms that had been left open. The building had 4 elevators. After 10 p.m., only elevator C stayed in service for the cleaning crew. The other 3 automatically shut down until morning. Everything felt normal during Marcus's first 2 weeks, until one Tuesday night. At exactly 1:18 a.m., while cleaning the 17th floor, he heard the familiar ding of elevator C arriving. The doors opened. Nobody stepped out. Marcus looked inside. Empty. He shrugged and carried on working. 5 minutes later, the elevator dinged again. This time it was waiting on the 16th floor. Again, nobody inside. Marcus assumed another cleaner had accidentally called it. He pressed the button to send it back downstairs and forgot about it. The following night, it happened again. 1:18 a.m. The elevator arrived. Empty. Then it stopped on another floor by itself. Then another. Marcus finally mentioned it over the radio. "Hey, Brian, you calling elevator C?" Brian was the overnight security guard. His reply came back almost instantly. "Negative. I'm still in the lobby." Marcus frowned. Maybe somebody forgot something upstairs before leaving work. It wasn't impossible. The building officially closed at 9, but people occasionally returned to grab laptops or paperwork. Still, something felt off. The access log showed nobody had entered the building since 9:11 p.m. The next evening, Marcus decided to pay closer attention. At exactly 1:18 a.m., ding, the doors opened on floor 19. Empty. The display above the elevator changed. The doors closed. Marcus watched as the elevator climbed one floor without anyone inside. Curious, he took the stairs. When he reached the 20th floor, the elevator doors were already open. Completely empty. No footsteps. No voices. No movement anywhere in the office. Only rows of dark desks stretching into the distance. Marcus stepped inside the elevator. The control panel still glowed. One button was lit. Floor 20. He hadn't pressed it. As he stared at the panel, another button illuminated by itself. Then, Marcus slowly backed out of the elevator. The doors closed on their own. He watched the floor numbers begin counting downward. 20, 19, 18, 17, as though somebody had just stepped inside and started riding the elevator back down. Except the security cameras showed nobody entering or leaving. And according to Brian in the lobby, elevator C had never left the 20th floor. Marcus stared at his radio. That couldn't be right. He looked back toward the elevator doors. They had definitely closed, and he had clearly watched the floor numbers count downward. If the elevator hadn't moved, then what exactly had he been looking at? He grabbed his radio again. "Brian, are you sure?" A burst of static came through before the reply. "I'm looking right at it, Marcus. Elevator C is still sitting on floor 20. It hasn't moved an inch." Marcus slowly walked over to the hallway windows overlooking downtown Chicago. The city lights stretched for miles below him, but inside the building, everything was silent. Then, ding, the elevator doors opened behind him. Marcus spun around. The car was empty. Once again, he stepped inside and looked at the control panel. None of the floor buttons were lit anymore. He pressed the button for the lobby. Nothing happened. The doors stayed open. He pressed it again. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the doors slid shut on their own. The elevator began moving. Marcus hadn't pressed a single working button. The display climbed upward. He frowned. There was no 21st floor. The building only had 20 stories. The elevator stopped with a soft ding. The doors opened. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. Beyond the doors wasn't another office. It was complete darkness. No lights. No walls. Just a long hallway stretching into the distance with rows of closed office doors on both sides. The carpet looked older. The ceiling lights were turned off. The place felt abandoned. Marcus didn't step out. Every instinct told him not to. He quickly pressed the door close button. Nothing. The doors remained open. Then, somewhere deep inside the darkness, he heard footsteps. Slow, steady, walking toward the elevator. His breathing became shallow. The footsteps grew louder. Whoever it was wasn't running. They were simply walking, one step at a time. Marcus slammed every button on the control panel. Still nothing. The footsteps kept getting closer. Then he heard something else. The squeak of a janitor's cart. Exactly like the one he used every night. Metal wheels rolling across old carpet. Closer, closer. Finally, a voice echoed from the darkness. Quiet, calm. Marcus. He froze. Nobody working in the building should have known he was there. The voice called again. Marcus, we're almost done up here. The words sounded strangely familiar. Not because he recognized the person speaking, but because they sounded exactly like his own voice. Panic finally took over. He hit the emergency alarm with all his strength. The loud buzzer echoed through the elevator. Instantly, the hallway disappeared. The doors slammed shut. The elevator dropped. Not quickly, just smoothly. Floor numbers began appearing again. When the doors finally opened on the 17th floor, Brian stood outside with two maintenance workers. Marcus stumbled out, breathing heavily. Brian grabbed his arm. What happened? Marcus looked back at the elevator. Everything appeared completely normal. He tried explaining what he'd seen, but the words barely made sense, even to him. The maintenance crew spent the next 2 hours inspecting Elevator C. They found nothing. No electrical faults. No software errors. No hidden floors. According to the building plans, there had never been a 21st floor. Marcus almost convinced himself that exhaustion had caused him to imagine the whole thing. Almost. The following afternoon, before his shift began, Brian handed him an old newspaper clipping that had been sitting in the building's security office for years. Back in 1998, a janitor named Raymond Ellis had disappeared while working the overnight shift. His cleaning cart was found inside Elevator C. The elevator itself had been sitting on the 20th floor with its doors open. Raymond was never found. Marcus looked closely at the black and white photograph printed beside the article. Raymond wore the same company uniform, pushed the same model of cleaning cart, and according to the article, his coworkers all reported hearing one strange thing over the building radios during the hours after he vanished. A voice repeatedly saying, "We're almost done up here." Marcus finished that week's shifts, then handed in his resignation. He never worked another overnight job. Today, Hawthorne Financial Center still operates as one of Chicago's busiest office towers. Employees use Elevator C every day without giving it a second thought. But the overnight cleaning staff follow one unwritten rule. If Elevator C opens by itself at exactly 1:18 in the morning, don't get inside. And if it ever takes you to a floor that isn't supposed to exist, don't answer when it calls your name. Story 2. The Warehouse Scanner. 29-year-old Tyler Brooks had spent nearly 5 years working the night shift at a massive distribution warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. The building was bigger than most shopping malls, stretching across more than 1 million square feet and holding thousands of products waiting to be shipped across the country. Every aisle looked almost identical. Towering metal shelves reached nearly 40 feet into the air, forklifts moved pallets through narrow lanes, and handheld scanners told workers exactly where to go next. Tyler liked the job because it was simple. Scan an item, pick it, move on to the next location. Most nights, he barely had to think. Everything changed one Thursday in October. Around 2:40 a.m., his scanner beeped with a new assignment. Aisle G17, bin 42. Pick one item. Tyler frowned. There wasn't a G17. The warehouse had aisles labeled A through F. He assumed the scanner had glitched and radioed his supervisor. "Hey, Lisa, my scanner's sending me to G17. There was a short pause before she answered. "Try restarting it. Probably just a software bug." Tyler rebooted the scanner. A few seconds later, beep. New pick request. Aisle G17. Bin 42. Exactly the same. He ignored it and continued with his regular orders. 30 seconds later, beep. The request returned. Again and again. After the fifth alert, Tyler finally walked over to the warehouse map mounted near the break room. It showed every aisle in the building. A through F. No G. He laughed to himself. Definitely a glitch. When he returned to work, another employee named Carlos walked past. Tyler jokingly asked if he'd ever heard of G17. Carlos stopped walking. His smile disappeared. "Where'd you hear that?" Tyler held up the scanner. "It keeps sending me there." Carlos stared at the screen for a moment before quietly saying something Tyler didn't expect. "Don't follow it." Then he walked away. Tyler stood there for several seconds. The warning sounded serious. Too serious. Later that night, curiosity got the better of him. Instead of ignoring the scanner, he decided to see where it wanted him to go. He followed the aisle numbers all the way to the back of the warehouse. Aisle F ended beside a tall concrete wall. There was nowhere else to go. The scanner beeped again. Distance to location. 40 feet. Tyler looked at the wall. 40 feet. Straight through solid concrete. He laughed under his breath. This was ridiculous. Then the distance changed. 35 feet. Without Tyler moving an inch. His smile faded. 30 feet. 25 feet. The scanner acted as though the location was getting closer. But nothing stood in front of him except the wall. Then, for the first time all night, he heard it. The faint sound of a forklift operating somewhere beyond the concrete. Beep, beep, beep. Metal pallets scraping across the floor. Workers talking to one another. The normal sounds of a busy warehouse. Except, there was no warehouse on the other side of that wall. Only an empty loading yard. Tyler slowly pressed his ear against the concrete. The sounds became clearer. Someone laughed. A forklift drove past. Then a voice echoed faintly through the wall. "Can somebody send a picker to G17? Tyler's scanner vibrated violently in his hand. New pick request. Urgent. Aisle G17. Bin 42. And beneath the order, a message he'd never seen before appeared across the screen. Employee waiting. Overdue since October 14th, 2019. Tyler stared at the screen. Employee waiting. Overdue since October 14th, 2019. His heart began pounding. He quickly checked the date on his scanner. October 14th. Exactly 7 years later. He stepped away from the wall and grabbed his radio. "Lisa, are you there?" Nothing. Only static. He tried again. "Carlos." Still nothing. Every radio channel had gone silent. The scanner beeped once more. Distance to location. 10 feet. Tyler hadn't moved. The sounds behind the wall became louder. Forklifts reversing. Workers calling out inventory numbers. Boxes being loaded onto pallets. It sounded like a warehouse in the middle of a busy shift. Then, a loud metallic crash echoed from the other side. Someone shouted. The voices suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Tyler took another step back. Without warning, a narrow metal door beside the concrete wall slowly swung open. He froze. He had walked past that wall hundreds of times. There had never been a door. Beyond it stretched another warehouse. It looked almost identical to the one he worked in, except everything felt older. The forklifts were different models. The workers wore an older version of the company uniform. The fluorescent lights flickered softly overhead. Nobody seemed to notice Tyler standing in the doorway. They simply carried on working. His scanner vibrated again. Bin 42. Straight ahead. Against every instinct, Tyler walked inside. He followed the aisle signs. G12, G13, G14. There really was a G17. When he reached bin 42, he found only a single cardboard box sitting on the shelf. A shipping label was attached to it. Employee file. Tyler Brooks. His blood ran cold. He slowly opened the box. Inside was a company ID badge. It belonged to a man named Nathan Cole. The photograph showed a warehouse picker wearing the same uniform Tyler wore every night. Tucked beneath the badge was a folded incident report. October 14th, 2019. Employee missing. Last known location. Aisle G17. Bin 42. Search unsuccessful. Case closed. Tyler's hands began shaking. He looked around. The warehouse had gone completely quiet. Every worker had stopped moving. Every forklift sat still. Then, one by one, they all turned toward him. Nobody spoke. They simply stared. Standing among them was Nathan Cole. He looked exactly like the photograph. Same face, same uniform, same ID badge. Nathan slowly smiled. Then he pointed toward the aisle behind Tyler. Tyler turned. The metal door was gone. Only endless rows of warehouse shelves stretched into the distance. Panic took over. He ran. Past G16. Past G15. Past G14. The workers never chased him. They simply watched. As he reached what should have been the end of the warehouse, another metal door appeared. He threw it open. Bright white light flooded his eyes. When his vision cleared, he was lying on the concrete floor beside the real warehouse wall. Lisa and Carlos stood over him. Tyler had been unconscious for nearly 20 minutes. The strange metal door had disappeared. The wall was solid again. He tried explaining everything. Nobody believed him, until Carlos quietly asked one question. Did the scanner send you to bin 42? Tyler nodded. Carlos looked down at the floor. Years ago, another picker named Nathan disappeared during a night shift. Security cameras showed him walking toward the back wall. He never came back. The company blamed it on him, leaving without telling anyone. His family never accepted that explanation. Tyler handed Carlos the incident report he'd found. Carlos stared at it in disbelief. It was the original report. Signed. Dated. Something the company claimed had been lost years earlier. Tyler finished his shift that morning and never returned. A few months later, the warehouse replaced every handheld scanner with a newer system. Employees were told it was part of a routine upgrade, but longtime workers still share one warning with every new hire. If your scanner ever sends you to aisle G17, don't follow it, because somewhere beyond that wall, another warehouse is still running its night shift. And according to the scanners, they're always one employee short. Story 3. The Overnight Radio. 38-year-old Daniel Foster had spent most of his career working highway maintenance across the mountains of Colorado. While most drivers slept, Daniel and his crew repaired guardrails, cleared fallen trees, filled potholes, and responded to emergencies before the morning rush began. It wasn't glamorous work, but somebody had to keep the roads safe. Every truck carried a two-way radio. It was the fastest way for crews spread across dozens of miles to stay in contact. Daniel worked the same overnight route almost every week along Highway 50, a lonely stretch of road that cut through dense forests and steep mountain passes west of Gunnison. After midnight, traffic almost disappeared. Sometimes 20 or 30 minutes would pass without a single car driving by. Most nights were quiet, until the first radio call. It happened just after 2:30 a.m. Daniel was replacing damaged reflectors near mile marker 118 when the radio crackled to life. Unit 12, We've got a fallen tree blocking both lanes near mile marker 134. Can somebody head this way? Daniel reached for the microphone. Dispatch, this is Unit 8. I'm about 15 minutes away. Silence. He waited. Nothing. Finally, dispatch answered. Unit 8. Repeat your last transmission. Daniel repeated himself. There was another pause. Then dispatch replied. We never called for a tree. Daniel looked down at the radio. He knew exactly what he'd heard. He assumed another maintenance crew had accidentally transmitted on the wrong frequency. The rest of the shift passed without incident. The following week, Daniel found himself working the same route. At exactly 2:31 a.m., the radio crackled again. Unit 12. We've got a fallen tree blocking both lanes near mile marker 134. Can somebody head this way? The message was word for word identical. Same voice. Same background noise. Even the slight cough at the end of the transmission was exactly the same. Daniel immediately contacted dispatch. Did you hear that? Hear what? The call about the fallen tree. Dispatch sounded confused. Unit 8. The radio's been quiet for the last 10 minutes. Daniel didn't argue. He simply drove toward mile marker 134. The road was completely clear. No fallen tree. No maintenance trucks. Nothing. He returned to work, trying to convince himself he'd imagined the whole thing. But over the next month, more strange calls started coming through. Every one of them happened between 2:30 and 2:35 in the morning. Unit 12 requesting backup. A report of black ice that wasn't there. A disabled truck that didn't exist. The voices always sounded calm. Professional. Like experienced road crews simply doing their jobs. Daniel started writing every transmission in a notebook. One night, another worker named Eric climbed into his truck during their lunch break. Daniel casually asked if he'd ever heard strange voices on the radio. Eric stopped eating. How long have you been hearing them? Daniel stared at him. So, I'm not the only one. Eric shook his head. Not even close. He leaned back in his seat before quietly explaining that the older workers all knew about the overnight calls. Most just didn't talk about them anymore. Daniel laughed nervously. Okay, what's the joke? Eric wasn't smiling. He told Daniel that years earlier, there had been another maintenance crew assigned to Highway 50. 5 workers, 2 trucks, 1 snowplow. During a blizzard, they radioed dispatch asking for emergency assistance after becoming trapped by falling trees near mile marker 134. Rescuers never reached them in time. The entire crew was found the following morning after an avalanche buried the road. Nobody survived. Daniel felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He looked toward the radio sitting on the dashboard. Eric pointed at it. Whatever you do, if they ever call your truck by its number, don't answer. Daniel frowned. Why? Eric looked out through the windshield before quietly replying. Because everyone who answered started hearing the calls every single night. Not just at work. Everywhere. Eric's warning stayed with Daniel for the rest of the night. He tried convincing himself it was nothing more than an old story passed around by workers to scare the new guys. Every job had its legends. Every workplace had rumors that grew bigger with each person who told them. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about mile marker 134. A week later, Daniel was back on Highway 50. The mountains were unusually quiet. Thick clouds covered the moon, and a cold wind pushed through the pine trees lining the road. Around him, there wasn't another vehicle in sight. The digital clock on his dashboard changed to 2:30 a.m. The radio crackled. Unit 12. We're stuck near mile marker 134. Visibility's getting worse. We need another truck out here. Daniel gripped the steering wheel. Same voice. Same calm tone. Then another voice joined in. Dispatch, we've lost the snowplow. I can't see him anymore. A burst of static followed. Daniel didn't touch the microphone. He remembered exactly what Eric had said. Don't answer. The road ahead disappeared into darkness as he continued driving. Then, without warning, the radio came alive again. Unit 8. This one's for you. Daniel froze. Nobody outside his own crew should have known his truck number. The voice continued. Unit 8. We're just up the road. We need one more truck. Please. Daniel's hand hovered over the microphone. Every instinct told him not to respond. Instead, he accelerated. He wanted to get as far away as possible. Less than a minute later, his headlights caught something in the distance. A maintenance truck, parked sideways across the shoulder near mile marker 134. Its amber warning lights flashed slowly through the darkness. Relief washed over him. Maybe another crew really was out there. He pulled closer. The truck looked old, much older than the ones currently used by the highway department. Its paint was faded. The company logo was one he hadn't seen before. As Daniel stepped out, he noticed something strange. Fresh snow covered the ground around the truck. That made no sense. It was late September. The temperature was nearly 60 degrees. There hadn't been snow in months. The driver's door stood open. Inside, the engine was still running. The radio hissed with static. Nobody was there. Then another maintenance truck appeared farther down the road. Its headlights slowly emerged through the darkness. Daniel waved his flashlight. The truck didn't stop. It rolled past him at a walking pace. As it passed, he looked through the driver's window. Every seat was occupied. 5 workers, all wearing older highway department uniforms. None of them looked at Daniel. They stared straight ahead, as if they couldn't even see him. The convoy continued toward the mountain pass before disappearing into the darkness. Seconds later, the road was empty again. Daniel stood there in complete silence. His own radio suddenly crackled. Unit 8. Thank you for coming. The transmission ended. The old maintenance truck behind him was gone. Only empty pavement remained. Shaken, Daniel drove straight back to the highway depot before sunrise. The next morning, he asked one of the older supervisors about the avalanche Eric had mentioned. Without saying a word, the supervisor unlocked an old filing cabinet and handed Daniel a newspaper clipping dated February 1997. The headline read, 5 highway workers killed during overnight rescue attempt. The photograph beneath it showed the crew standing beside 2 maintenance trucks. Daniel's stomach dropped. They were the exact same 5 men he'd seen driving past him only hours earlier. The supervisor quietly folded the newspaper closed. He admitted that every few years, another worker reported hearing those same radio calls. Most ignored them. Some answered. None of those workers stayed on Highway 50 for very long. Daniel transferred to a daytime position the following month. He never worked another overnight shift. Even today, truckers driving through that stretch of Highway 50 sometimes report hearing maintenance crews talking over emergency radio frequencies during the early hours of the morning. Dispatch never hears the conversations. Only the drivers do. And every now and then, just after 2:30 a.m., one final transmission is picked up by anyone listening. Unit 8. Thanks for stopping. We'll take it from here. Story 4. The hospital basement. 41-year-old Kevin Marshall had worked as a maintenance technician for nearly 15 years. His job wasn't exciting, but it paid well. If a pipe burst, he fixed it. If the heating stopped working, he repaired it. If an elevator broke down, he was usually the first person called. In January of 2026, Kevin transferred to St. Gabriel Medical Center in St. Louis, Missouri. The hospital never truly slept. Doctors changed shifts. Nurses rushed between departments. Ambulances arrived throughout the night. Even at 3 in the morning, somebody was always awake. Except in the basement. Most employees never had a reason to go down there. The lower level contained old storage rooms, maintenance tunnels, electrical equipment, and sections of the original hospital that had been closed for years after newer buildings were added. Kevin spent most of his nights down there. One Thursday, just after 2 a.m., the engineering office received an automatic alert. Power fluctuation. Basement Sector C. Kevin grabbed his toolbox and headed downstairs. Sector C was one of the oldest parts of the hospital. The walls were concrete, the lights buzzed overhead, and faded signs still pointed toward departments that no longer existed. As he reached the electrical room, he found the breaker panel. Everything looked normal. No tripped switches, no damaged wiring, no smell of burning insulation. He reset the monitoring system anyway. The alert disappeared. Problem solved. Or so he thought. The following night, 2:07 a.m., the exact same alert appeared. Power fluctuation. Basement Sector C. Kevin walked back downstairs. Again, nothing. The equipment worked perfectly. The electrical readings were completely normal. He returned upstairs feeling more confused than concerned. By the end of the week, the alert had happened 5 nights in a row. Always at exactly 2:07 a.m. Always in Sector C. One evening, Kevin mentioned it to an older nurse named Linda while fixing a broken sink. She immediately looked uncomfortable. Sector C? Kevin nodded. Linda quietly asked him a strange question. Have you ever gone past the old surgical wing? Kevin frowned. There's an old surgical wing down there? Linda looked around to make sure nobody else was listening. She explained that decades earlier, before the hospital expanded, the basement had housed operating rooms and recovery wards. After the new medical tower opened, those rooms were abandoned and eventually sealed off. Nobody used them anymore. Kevin laughed. Well, somebody forgot to tell the electrical system. Linda didn't smile. Just, don't go past the yellow doors if you can avoid it. That warning stayed with Kevin. The next night, another alert came through. 2:07 a.m. Sector C. This time, instead of turning back after checking the breaker room, he decided to keep walking. The hallway grew quieter with every step. Modern lighting gave way to older fluorescent fixtures. Paint peeled from the walls. Dust covered the floor. Eventually, he found them. 2 large yellow double doors. A faded sign above them read, Surgical Ward B. Authorized personnel only. The doors stood slightly open. Kevin pushed them apart. Beyond them stretched an old hospital corridor that looked as though nobody had entered it in years. Wheelchairs sat abandoned against the walls. Patient rooms stood open. Old medical charts were scattered across the nurses' station. The place felt frozen in time. Then, he heard it. A heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Soft, steady, coming from somewhere farther down the hallway. Kevin slowly followed the sound. One room near the end of the corridor had light spilling underneath the door. He checked his watch. 2:07 a.m. The beeping suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the hallway. Then a calm voice echoed from inside the room. Maintenance. We've been waiting for you. The voice caught Kevin completely off guard. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It sounded calm, almost polite, like a doctor asking a coworker for help. Kevin stood frozen outside the room. Every instinct told him to turn around. Instead, he slowly pushed the door open. The room looked untouched. An old hospital bed stood in the center beneath a surgical light that somehow still worked. Rusted medical equipment lined the walls, and faded patient charts covered a desk in the corner. The heart monitor sat beside the bed. Its screen was completely black, unplugged. There wasn't even a power cable connected to it. Kevin stared at the machine. It couldn't have been making any noise. Then he noticed something else. Fresh footprints. They ran from the doorway to the patient's bed. Only one set, as though someone had walked into the room, but never walked back out. His radio suddenly crackled. Kevin, it was his supervisor upstairs. Everything okay down there? Kevin immediately grabbed the microphone. Yeah, I found an old room. I'm heading back now. The reply came instantly. What room? There shouldn't be any rooms where you are. Kevin frowned. He looked back toward the hallway. The yellow double doors had disappeared. Instead, the corridor stretched much farther than before. Room after room, door after door, as though the hallway had somehow grown. His breathing became heavier. He started walking. Every room he passed had its doors slightly open. Inside each one sat an empty hospital bed. The farther he walked, the older everything looked. The paint, the equipment, even the hospital signs. It felt as though he was walking backward through time. Then, a nurse stepped into the hallway. She wore an old-fashioned white uniform that hadn't been used in decades. She looked completely normal. No injuries. No strange appearance. She simply smiled. You're late, she said. The patient's been waiting. Kevin didn't answer. He kept walking. The nurse didn't follow. She simply watched him disappear down the hallway. Moments later, another voice echoed through the corridor. "Doctor's on the way. Prepare operating room 2. Then another. "We're losing him. Move." Suddenly, the entire hallway came alive. Doors opened. Medical carts rolled past. Doctors hurried between rooms. Patients were pushed on stretchers. For just a few seconds, the abandoned ward looked exactly as it must have decades earlier. Kevin stood in the middle of it all. Nobody acknowledged him. Nobody looked at him. It was like watching the past replay itself. Then, every person stopped moving at exactly the same time. Slowly, every head turned toward Kevin. The hallway fell completely silent. A doctor standing closest to him spoke first. "Maintenance. The lights keep going out. Can you fix them this time?" Every light above Kevin flickered, then went dark. His flashlight slipped from his hand. The corridor disappeared into blackness. Kevin turned and ran. He didn't stop. He didn't look behind him. He simply followed the direction he thought he'd come from. Seconds later, he burst through a pair of yellow double doors and landed back in the modern maintenance corridor. His supervisor and 2 security officers were standing there. Kevin had been missing for almost 40 minutes. He looked back. The yellow doors were shut. A heavy chain and padlock wrapped around the handles. One of the security officers quietly admitted something he'd never heard before. The old surgical ward had been sealed nearly 30 years earlier after the hospital expansion. Nobody had entered it since. Kevin tried explaining what he'd seen. The nurse, the doctors, the operating rooms, the heart monitor. Nobody believed him, until one of the older doctors overheard the conversation. He walked over and asked Kevin a single question. "Did they ask you to fix the lights?" Kevin nodded. The doctor's expression changed immediately. He quietly explained that during a citywide blackout in the early 1990s, emergency generators failed for several minutes while surgeons were operating in the old basement ward. Several patients died before power could be restored. The maintenance technician on duty blamed himself for the rest of his life. Kevin never returned to Sector C. He transferred to another hospital before the month ended. Today, St. Gabriel Medical Center still treats thousands of patients every week. Most employees have never heard of the old surgical ward beneath the building. But the maintenance staff all know one unwritten rule. If your pager reports a power failure in basement Sector C at exactly 2:07 in the morning, reset the alarm from upstairs. Because if you go looking for the problem yourself, you might find a hospital that's still waiting for someone to restore the lights. Story 5. Closing time. 27-year-old Sarah Mitchell had worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour convenience store outside Tulsa, Oklahoma for almost 3 years. The hours suited her. The store stayed busy enough to make the nights pass quickly, but after midnight, most customers were truck drivers, police officers, or people grabbing coffee before an early shift. She got to know many of the regulars. There was the construction worker who bought an energy drink every morning at 4 a.m. The elderly man who stopped in every Friday for a newspaper and black coffee. And the local deputy who always joked that Sarah made better coffee than the station. The routine almost never changed. Until one Monday in November. At exactly 2:43 a.m., a man walked into the store wearing a dark baseball cap, a gray hoodie, and blue jeans. He looked to be in his early 30s and carried himself like someone who had just finished a long drive. He quietly picked up 3 items: a bottle of water, a turkey sandwich, a small bag of barbecue chips. Sarah rang everything through. The total came to $11.87. The man smiled politely, thanked her, paid in cash, and walked back into the night. Nothing unusual. The following night, 2:43 a.m., the front door chimed. The same man walked in. Same gray hoodie, same baseball cap, same 3 items: water, turkey sandwich, barbecue chips. He paid with cash again. The total was exactly the same. Sarah smiled. Back for the same order? The man smiled back, but didn't answer. He simply thanked her and left. By the end of the week, The routine had become almost comforting. Every night, 2:43 a.m. Same customer, same clothes, same food, same total. One Thursday, Sarah decided to have his order waiting before he even entered. At exactly 2:43, the door opened. The man looked at the counter. His usual items were already sitting there. For the first time, he laughed. "Guess you figure me out." Sarah laughed too. "You make my job easy." He nodded politely before paying and leaving once again. A few nights later, Sarah mentioned the regular customer to her coworker, Ben, who had just started the morning shift. Ben looked confused. "Which guy?" "The one in the gray hoodie. Always comes in at 2:43. Water, turkey sandwich, barbecue chips." Ben slowly shook his head. "I've never seen him." Sarah frowned. "Really? He's here every single night." Ben walked over to the security monitor behind the counter. "Let's have a look." Sarah rewound the footage from the previous night. The store doors opened at exactly 2:43 a.m. She watched herself place the 3 items onto the counter. She smiled. She spoke to someone, accepted cash, handed over a receipt, then watched nothing. Nobody stood in front of her. The shopping bags floated into the air by themselves. The automatic doors opened and closed. Ben looked at Sarah. His face had gone completely pale. Sarah immediately replayed the footage. Again, the exact same thing happened. She was clearly serving a customer, but camera 3 showed nobody there. Then the register printed another receipt. Sarah picked it up with shaking hands. The transaction had gone through. Paid in cash. Time, 2:43 a.m. Customer name, Michael Carter. Beneath the receipt, the register printed something neither of them had ever seen before. Last purchase before accident. Sarah stared at the receipt. Last purchase before accident. She looked at Ben. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ben reached over and printed a copy of the transaction history. The receipt was real. The payment had gone through. Cash drawer opened. Sale completed. Everything looked completely normal, except for one detail. There was no security footage showing anyone standing at the register. The following morning, Ben searched the customer name online. Michael Carter. The very first result was a local news article from 4 years earlier. Tulsa man killed in overnight highway crash. Sarah clicked on it. The photograph made her stomach drop. It was him. The same gray hoodie. The same baseball cap. The same friendly smile. According to the article, Michael had been driving home from a late shift when a distracted driver crossed the center line just a few miles from the convenience store. Emergency crews found his car less than 10 minutes later. Inside the vehicle, investigators recovered a bottle of water, a turkey sandwich, and an unopened bag of barbecue chips. Sarah slowly leaned back in her chair. Those were the exact 3 items he'd been buying every single night. That evening, she almost called in sick. Instead, she decided she needed to know the truth. At exactly 2:40 a.m., she placed the familiar order on the counter before the customer arrived. Water, turkey sandwich, barbecue chips. The clock reached 2:43. The front door chimed. Cold air drifted into the store. Michael walked inside. He smiled exactly as he always had. "Looks like you remembered." Sarah nodded nervously. She scanned the items. This time, instead of taking the money, she quietly asked him a question. "Michael, do you know what happened to you?" His smile slowly disappeared. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. Then he looked around the store as though he had never seen it before. His eyes settled on the receipt printer. He read the message sticking out beneath it. Last purchase before accident. Confusion spread across his face. He looked back at Sarah. "What accident?" The lights inside the store flickered. The refrigerators hummed loudly. Outside, a pair of headlights briefly flashed across the front windows. Michael slowly lowered his eyes toward the shopping bag in his hands. Then, almost like someone remembering a dream, he whispered, "I was driving home." Sarah didn't answer. He looked toward the front door. The smile was gone now. Only sadness remained. "I never made it home, did I?" Sarah quietly shook her head. Michael stood in silence for a moment before giving her a small, grateful smile. Thank you. Those were the last words she ever heard him say. The automatic doors slid open. He walked into the darkness. This time, he never came back. The following night, 2:43 a.m. passed. Nobody entered. The night after that, nothing. His routine had finally ended. A week later, Sarah drove to the cemetery where Michael Carter had been buried. She placed a bottle of water, a turkey sandwich, and a small bag of barbecue chips beside his headstone. She stood there quietly for a few minutes before leaving. When she reached her car, she noticed something tucked beneath her windshield wiper. It was a convenience store receipt, dated that morning. The total read $11.87. At the bottom was a handwritten message. Thanks for remembering me. No store logo, no transaction number, no explanation, just those 4 words. Sarah kept that receipt folded inside her wallet for years. She eventually left the overnight shift, but she never forgot the man who came into the store every night believing he was simply finishing another long drive home. The convenience store is still open today. Employees come and go. Most have never heard Michael Carter's story, but the older staff still tell every new overnight worker the same thing. If a customer walks in at exactly 2:43 every morning and orders a bottle of water, a turkey sandwich, and a bag of barbecue chips, serve him with a smile, because sometimes all someone needs before they can finally move on is one last stop on the way home. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Dreadful Visions for more unsettling tales inspired by the night shift and the strange things people encounter while the rest of the world sleeps. Sleep well tonight, if you can.